During the pandemic, it's become normal to have to wear a mask in public. And my friends love posting photos of themselves wearing masks on social media. But then they start saying things like, oh, these masks, they're making my glasses fog up. Oh, these masks, they're making me go cross-eyed. Oh, these masks, they're giving me a headache. Now, I work as a doctor, so I have to wear a mask for work. So part of me feels like saying, oh, please, welcome to my world. But I don't, because I get it. There's something strange. There's something scary about what's going on. There's something broken in our world. And the longer that we live, the more broken our lives become. And it's not just our cars that break down. It's not just our bodies that break down. Our lives break down. Our work breaks down. Our finances break down. Our relationships break down. We break down. So our question today is this: what would Jesus say to the broken? Well, g'day, my name is Sam Chan. I'm with City Bible Forum. Thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm going to try to answer this question: what would Jesus say to the broken, in the form of a 20-minute talk. And we're going to look at a person that Jesus meets in the Bible, because Jesus meets a broken woman. And we meet her in Mark chapter 5. And we're going to hear what Jesus says to her, and we're going to hear what Jesus says to us today. So what would Jesus say to the broken? Well, we meet the woman in Mark chapter 5, verse 25. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I could just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and he asked, "Who touched my clothes?" Jesus meets a broken woman. Her body is broken. She has been bleeding for 12 long years. Her body is frail, fragile, and fatigued. But it's not just her body that's broken. Her finances are broken. We read that she has suffered under the care of the doctors. She has paid all their bills, and she's worse than she was before. Now, I'm a doctor, so I want to say guilty, guilty, guilty. This is what's happened to this woman. She has seen doctors, paid all their bills, and she's worse than she was before. And socially, she's also broken. Because of her disease, she's shunned, she's shamed, she's cut out, she is cancelled. But then she comes up to Jesus, touches his cloak, and immediately she's healed. Her bleeding stops. But then Jesus also stops and he says, "Who touched me?" Now, this is the part of the story I just don't get. Why would Jesus stop? We know from the biggest story, he's on an emergency. He's trying to see a girl. He's rushing to see a sick, dying girl. There's no time to spare, but Jesus stops. This is like an ambulance on an emergency with the sirens and lights blaring, bam, 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 and suddenly the ambulance stops because it sees a person suffering from arthritis. And you say, "Jesus, why would you stop?" Because Jesus wants this woman to hear, and he wants us to hear what he would say to the broken. And Jesus says three things. And the first thing that Jesus says is this: Jesus wants to publicly recognize this woman's brokenness. Verse 31, "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Jesus wants to stop so he can publicly, in front of everyone, recognize this woman's brokenness. I used to live in an apartment, and my car would be parked in the basement garage. And one day I went to the garage to go to my car so I could drive to work. And that's when I realized I was going nowhere because someone had stolen my steering wheel and someone had stolen my battery. So I had to ring up my mechanic and tell him to come. And he came and he very kindly gave me a new steering wheel and he put in a new battery. But notice what the mechanic did not do. My mechanic did not say, Sam, what have you done? No, he knew, he recognized my broken down situation. Someone else had done this to me. I hadn't done anything. And this woman belongs in the category of brokenness. Well, what is the category of brokenness? I once heard a very gifted US preacher explain it this way. Brokenness is not when you have done something, it's when something has been done to you. Brokenness is not the bad stuff you have done, it's the bad stuff that has happened to you. Brokenness is not the shameful things you have done, it's the fact that you have been shamed. And this woman belongs in the category of brokenness. Now, that's very helpful for us religious, Christian-y type people to know, because often us religious, Christian-y type people, we only know the categories of right and wrong, true and false, sin and guilt. Now, those categories are helpful categories, they're correct categories, and they're categories that do belong in the Bible, but they're not the only categories. The Bible also has the category of brokenness. And to explain the category of brokenness, the Bible gives us a story of Job. And maybe you know the story of Job. Job's life becomes broken. His body breaks down. His family breaks down. His heart breaks down. He is broken. But then Job's well-meaning religious friends turn up and they only know the categories of right and wrong, true and false, sin and guilt, and they come up to Job and say, Job, this is something you have done. You have sinned. You are guilty. You have done something wrong and you need to repent. But the Bible is very clear. Job is a righteous person. He belongs in the category of brokenness. He hasn't done anything bad. No bad things have been done to him. And maybe we too need to know this, because we might only think in categories of right and wrong, sin and guilt. And yes, we may have those things in our life, but the longer we live, the more broken we too become. And this woman belongs in a category of brokenness. So what's the second thing that Jesus is going to say to her? It's this. Jesus reverses her brokenness. Verse 32, but Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at Jesus' feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. Then Jesus said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Jesus reverses the brokenness in this woman's life. I used to have an Alpha. Now, an Alpha is a gorgeous car. It's beautiful, but an Alpha is also an Italian car. What could go wrong with an Italian car, right? Yeah, well, everything used to go wrong with my Alpha. It used to be so broken down, often it'll go nowhere and be just parked on my front lawn. So my wife nicknamed it the garden gnome, because that's what it was, just a garden gnome sitting on my front lawn going nowhere. But one time I did get it going, but it had no reverse gear. It could only go forward, but not backwards. And there was one night in a street of Sydney, I was trying to do a 3-point turn, but I couldn't because I could only go forward, but not backwards. And the more I tried, the more I got stuck. And this woman is stuck. And the more she tries to get out of her broken situation, the more stuck she becomes. The more she bleeds, the more broken her body becomes. The more broken her body becomes, the more she bleeds. The more she's in debt, the more financially broken she is. The more financially broken she is, the more in debt she becomes. And the more shunned and shamed she is, the more cut off she becomes. The more cut off she becomes, the more shunned and shamed she becomes. She is stuck. She cannot reverse her way out of this situation. But Jesus comes and reverses her brokenness. Where she's been trapped, Jesus sets her free. Where she's had private shame, Jesus publicly honors her. And where she's had chaos, Jesus now gives her peace. Shalom. So what is peace? What is shalom? Well, during the pandemic, we all got into jigsaw puzzles, and we know how jigsaw puzzles work. When we first open the box, it's just chaos. It's a mess. It's pieces everywhere. But then bit by bit, as we do the puzzle, we restore order and we put the pieces where they should belong. And there's that moment when we put the final piece into place, and as it clicks in, that's a moment of shalom, peace. And Jesus gives this woman peace. He brings shalom and puts all the pieces in her life back where they should be. But how does Jesus do that? Well, that brings us to the third thing that Jesus says, and it's this. Jesus redefines her brokenness. Verse 34, Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Jesus publicly redefines this woman's brokenness. And did you hear it? He called her daughter. He redefines her by her relationship with Jesus. Now, I have 3 young boys, and I still get to do the daddy school drop-off. And I love the daddy school drop-off because I still get to hold their hand. I still get to hug them, and I still get to give them a kiss goodbye in public. But I know there'll be a day very soon where they're not going to want the daddy school drop-off. They're not going to want me holding their hand. They're not going to want me hugging them. And they're certainly not going to want me kissing them goodbye in public. But I'm okay with that because I know they have to grow up. They have to find their own identity. So what's our identity going to be? We can define ourselves by what we do, but then that's just going to make us proud and insecure at the same time because we can never do enough to be somebody. Well, we can define ourselves by what's been done to us, but that's always going to just make us the victim. And we're going to be defined by the worst that's happened to us, and we'll never be able to move on. But Jesus gives us a third, the best way, and it's to be defined by Jesus. We're defined by who Jesus is and what he's done for us. We are defined by our relationship with Jesus. We are a child of God. And I love that vision at the end of the Bible in the book of Revelation, where it shows all of God's people, all of God's children around the throne of Jesus, and they're dressed in robes of white. And that means at that moment, God looks at us and he doesn't see us as what's been done to us. He doesn't see us as what we've done, but he sees us as Jesus, by who Jesus is and what Jesus has done for us. And that's very important for us to know, because I'm sure many of us, we have so much brokenness in our life. Maybe we've had businesses that have broken down. We've had relationships that have broken down. Our finances have broken down. Maybe there are children who no longer talk to us. Maybe there are parents we can't talk to. And maybe we feel we can't even walk into a church because we have so much shame in our life and we fear being judged. But Jesus says, come to me and be defined by our relationship with Jesus. Be defined by who Jesus is and what Jesus has done for us. And that's also very important for us religiously, Christian-y people to know as well. Because when we turn up to church and we see the people around us, we need to see them the same way God sees them, in robes of white. We need to see them in their relationship with Jesus. And we need to see them defined by who Jesus is and what Jesus has done for them. Well, do you remember our original question? And it was this: what would Jesus say to the broken? And today we've heard three things. Number one, Jesus publicly recognizes our brokenness. Number two, Jesus reverses our brokenness. And number three, Jesus redefines our brokenness. I remember when I was a junior medical student and I sat in a dermatology clinic, a skin disease clinic, and this woman came in with this painful, disfiguring skin disease, this rash, and she slowly described her disease to the doctor. And then the doctor stopped her and said, hey, I get it. I know what you have. This is what your disease is. This is what it's called. And these are the symptoms you're experiencing. And at that moment, the woman's eyes just beamed with joy. And she smiled and said, yes, you're the first person who understands me. And then she said, but what can you do for this disease? And that's when the doctor said, there's nothing we can do. And the woman's face just fell. She was devastated because this doctor understood her, but he couldn't do anything for her. But this is where Jesus is different. He comes and becomes one of us. And he doesn't just understand our brokenness. He has the power to reverse our brokenness because he has the power to redefine our brokenness, where we can be defined by not what we have done, not by what has been done to us, but by Jesus, by who he is and what he's done for us. Because, and this is the sneaky fourth thing I'm going to put in here, and it's another R word, because Jesus actually replaces our brokenness. Because the story doesn't end with Jesus and the woman. The story ends when Jesus dies on a cross and swaps places with us, where he becomes the bleeding one, where he becomes the broken one, where he becomes the shunned, shamed, cancelled, cut off one, so we can swap places with Jesus and be the glorified one, the honored one, the child of God. And just like he gave this woman a chance to publicly come forward and be redefined, Jesus gives us all a chance to be publicly recognized as a child of God if we put our trust in Jesus, if we're loyal to Jesus, and if we are prepared to be identified by who Jesus is and what he's done for us.